No!
Oh, it is. Oh my goodness, it's mates.
So get ready for an absolute masterpiece. I mean, the harmony and the flow to this game is just awesome. I mean, I learnt loads analysing it just now, and I know you will too just watching this one. Plus, the finish is just awesome. So this is Magnus Carlsen. He's playing against Danya Naroditsky, and it's in the Pro Chess League, played a couple of weeks back. It's rapid play, clock times on the left, and in the words of Danya Naroditsky,
here we go.
So Magnus kicks off with pawn to d4, knight f6, c4, g6 from Danya, and after knight c3, we don't see d5, the Grunfeld defence, but bishop g7, signalling that he wants to play the King's Indian, one of his favourites. So Magnus takes the centre, pawn d6 prevents e5 for the moment. Now pawn to h3, and this is not the classical way to play, which is by putting the knight on f3. This is known as the Makoganov variation, and there's quite a positional idea to this actually. So after castles, bishop e3, we see black striking the centre, Magnus pushes on, immediately giving up this square which Danya now targets with knight to a6, and now Magnus goes pawn g4. And although this looks aggressive, like he's trying to pawn storm on the king side, there's actually quite a positional idea behind this, which is to stop black from playing f5 and attacking you on the king side. And if you're not playing f5, well, black can end up getting a bit squashed, which is something we see in terms of the space. So knight c5 play targets the e-pawn, queen c2 covers, and now c6 strikes at the centre in true hypermodern fashion. We see the knight developing, pawn takes, pawn recaptures, and now queen to a5 renews the threat to take on e4 because this knight is now pinned. So knight g3 covers the pawn a third time. Now we see bishop d7 developing, connecting the rooks, and after rook b1, Magnus is threatening b4, so the knight hops into a4 here, and you can't capture of course because the knight's still pinned to the king. So here we see the queen breaking the pin, and by the way, if you try b4 now, well, it's no good because the queen drops back to c7, and the knight's now pinned here. If you move it, you lose your queen, and with the rook now coming to c8 soon, there's a lot of uncomfortable pressure building here. Black's equalised. So instead, Magnus goes queen d2. Now we see the knight capture, and we see the pawn recapture so that the queen then defends this a pawn laterally. Now Magnus is attacking the b pawn, so Danya defends. And now here we see pawn to g5, that squeeze of space, and black would love to hop the knight into h5 here, then look to come to f4, even at the cost of a pawn if the bishop takes, to open this one from g7. But you can't do it here or else the knight captures. This is the problem. So instead the knight hops back. Now there is a journey back into the game as I'm drawing on the board, round to this c5 square, but for the meantime c4 from Magnus, offering a queen exchange which is accepted. Danya didn't have better, and we can see here that white's now got the more space to manoeuvre the pieces. So f6 played, looking to break out, pawn h4 from Magnus covers g5. We see an exchange, and now rook f7, a multi-purpose move. You laterally defend the 7th, and you also allow this bishop to enter the game in a lot of lines, because it's pretty stuck out on this square at the moment, as we can see. Knight e2 from Magnus, he remanoeuvres this one. It was going nowhere from g3. Knight c7, now the knight comes to c3, and after knight a6, we see the bishop come across, cover the c5 square. Danya hops anyway, and now Magnus is in no rush to start exchanging pieces. He's the one with the space. So king d2, bishop f8 looks to enter the game, and now this is a nice positional moment from Magnus. What does he do? He plays bishop h3. So he exchanges these light squared bishops. Why? Because now the knight's got access to the b5 square. And if you ever go a6, of course, well then the b6 pawn becomes tender. This is one of the challenges. So rook c8 played, targets the c pawn. Now rook b4 covers, bishop e7, and now Magnus just plays slowly with king to e2, and it's good prophylaxis covering the f-pawn, because if the bishop ever has to recapture here or take this knight, well at least then you're covering this one from the attack of the rook. So bishop d8 just nudges back, not much Danya can do, plus he covers this pawn if he ever pushes the a-pawn. Now rook h1 from Magnus, he's bringing that one back into the game, and now knight a6 hits the rook on b4, it retreats, and after the knight hops back, here we see rook a3, and it's a bit of a provocative move because it looks quite boxed in there, and sure enough, Danya now goes a5, taking away the b4 square, the knight covers the other two, and it looks a bit passive for white. But the moment this knight moves, well, then the rook can re-enter. Rook b1 now played, targets the backwards b pawn. We see king f8, pawn f3 from Magnus, the king carries on coming, and now finally this knight hops into the outpost, hits the pawn, and so Danya covers with the rook. This rook switches back. I mean, it's just beautiful from Magnus, probing the position. The king starts running back to cover this pawn some more. Rook c3. Now watch this rook go. Comes to the back rank. Now bishop e7. All Danya can really do is shuffle. Rook h3, bishop d8, and the second rook doubles. And it's games like this that really show you why you don't see a lot of King's Indian at the top level. White's got the space, white's manoeuvring, black is suffering. Knight b7 now played, targets this pawn. King d3 covers, the knight hops back with check. And now this is where Magnus unleashes the whirlwind. Can you see the best move in this position here? So the way that white has to play is with bishop takes on c5. You eliminate the knight because after rook recaptures, well, there's a breakthrough here. But maybe not in the way you think. So have a think about what you might play, and then I'm going to show you this clip here, which is what the commentators thought should be played in this position.
It might be knight takes d6, like something like this.
Right.
Oh!
Oh, it is. Oh my goodness. It's mate.
It's mate. The two rooks
It's mate.
by themselves with this pawn.
Yo, get out of here. It's gross.
So all of the analysis you've just seen there is correct. But after knight takes on d6, there's an issue. You don't have to recapture with the rook. You can take this pawn here with the bishop, and it completely changes the evaluation of the position. Because now f4 is not coming, the bishop's going to find a home there on that square, and now anything's going on in the position. Black's going to get pressure on this pawn, for example. So what we see in the game from Magnus is not knight takes on d6, but pawn f4. Absolutely the correct move. Covers g5, also attacks here. Now Danya takes the pawn, best move, but now here comes the breakthrough that's been in the air. The best move now is knight takes on d6. Brilliant move, and Magnus finds it. And what's the idea here? Well, now if the rook takes, it's all of the same themes of the rooks crashing through. After bishop takes here, well, we check, king goes, check. And although in this line the king is not getting checkmated, it finds a home on e5 because there's no pawn there. Well, the problem is check, king goes, and then there's this check here, and you pick up an entire rook. That's completely game over. You've also got the passed pawn running. So what did we see in the game? Well, after the knight took on d6, Danya took on g5. The knight is immune, but now e5 from Magnus. Look at these pawns rolling. The bishop drops back. The knight drops back, hits the rook, also clears the way for the pawns. Now rook c8, pawn e6, the rook goes, pawn d6. I mean, look at those monsters on the 6th rank. And now g5 from Danya, he's just desperate for counterplay. But now rook h6 doesn't allow a tempo with g4, also looks in this direction, supporting the pawns, maybe supporting knight f6 check. g4 was played by Danya, and he really had very little better. This bishop's trapped, but he just couldn't untrap it. You know, if he tried b5, there's c5 even, the whole thing's just terrible. So he tries g4, but now Magnus goes e7. The bishop has to take. Danya's down a piece, the rook captures, and now there's even a check here. The king moves and you pick up this pawn. And now it's Magnus's technique because he checks. The king goes, but there's a really nice finish here. So two pawns are attacked. Which one do you defend? Well, Danya comes with this one to defend the h pawn, but Magnus takes here. And now rook c7 was followed by check. The rook blocks, and now this is a nice tactic. Can you find the best move for white in this position here? So the move to play which Magnus finds is rook takes on h7, and you cannot capture the rook because it's pinned to the king here. So we see the rook taking on f6, which I've just moved accidentally, and now the knight recaptures, and it even covers this rook here. So rook c6 hits the knight, Magnus goes knight d7 check, king g8, the rook drops back, hitting this pawn, and now Danya can't defend from f6, the knight covers the square, so he first attacks the knight, but Magnus just flicks in this crafty check now, always trying to make his opponent go wrong, and Danya does it here. He jumps to the corner. Better was king f7, but then you'd be running into a check after knight e5. However, what he's overlooked here is that after rook f6, defending the pawn, Magnus has got a really nice finishing blow. Can you guess what he played? So the move to play here is rook takes on f4, and that forced resignation, because after rook captures, this is the check, you pick up the rook, and that's the entire game. So a nice win by Magnus, and if you want to see another classic encounter in rapid chess, then check out this video on screen. Thanks very much for watching, and see you soon.